Okay. It's a pleasure to introduce to you today Professor Stefano de Gironcoli. Stefano is very important in the field. Actually, in the field of electronic structure, he's very important, working in developing pseudo-potentials and developing functionals also. So he's well known for developing one of these Van der Waals exchange correlation functional and implementing it in the package that many of us know. So he supervised Yusuf Shaidu that presented the other time, and Dr. Emine that will also be presenting later today. He's at CISA in Italy, Trieste, Italy, and he'll be talking to us today about neural network potential and how to be able to explore crystal structure landscape. So over to you, Stefano. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be there, or at least virtually. And so what I'm going to talk about is some effort that we have done in recent years about trying to study crystal structures in a kind of unbiased way. And this led us to the interest in neural network potentials, because as we will see, some calculation becomes impossible basically with ab initio calculations, and so one has to find alternatives. So actually all the work I'm presenting is not mine, but actually involve many other people. Emine Küçükmeli, that is going to talk after me, and we'll talk about some more recent development in what we are doing. Ruggero Lotta is a PhD student in CISA and Toulouse. Actually, is a shared PhD student between Italy and France. Franco Pellegrini, formerly PhD student in CISA and now back in CISA as a young researcher, and Yusuf Shaidu that you saw yesterday, I guess, and presented the code PANNA. PANNA is actually a code that these 4 people are developing, and you can find in the GitLab repository that is set in the bottom of this slide. And really, all the work I'm presenting is their work. Crystal structure prediction is the problem of finding what is the most stable, depending on pressure and temperature, configuration that is you can find if you specify a certain chemical stoichiometry, a certain chemical formula. And this is a very complicated task. You could say, if I have a molecule, how this molecule will crystallize, what will be the crystal structure that determined by the chemistry of a given molecule, or what is the most stable structure of carbon. Okay, we know that carbon, diamond and graphite, these are the historically well-known structure of carbon, but there are all the graphene is very important, all the nanotubes, the fullerenes. So there are a number of, there is a variety of chemistry, the variety of structural variation that carbon can sustain. And so this is a very diverse set of configuration, and we have to explore. So what is the challenge? The challenge is that the space of chemical possibility and structural possibility is very wide, very broad, and we need to navigate this landscape with an accurate method. And accurate methods we need to navigate a very vast landscape, which has many possibilities, with methods that are accurate enough to describe it. And so this is a big challenge. And so for instance, to name one system that we looked at recently, well, recently means 5 years ago or so, is glycine. Glycine is the simplest amino acid, is a 10 atom molecules, and has a number of phases. So the glycine has 3 phases that are known at room temperature: alpha, beta, gamma. Alpha is the easiest to crystallize, to find. The most stable actually is the gamma phase, which is somehow difficult to obtain, but once if you do calorimetric measurement, you find out that the gamma phase is indeed the most stable. But then if you apply external factors like pressure, for instance, so if you modify the external conditions, like you increase pressure, the beta phase may transform in another phase, delta phase. The alpha phase stay more or less unchanged for a while, up to the pressure that has been explored so far. But the gamma phase, for instance, is transformed into another one, which is called epsilon. And when you actually withdraw you release the pressure, there is an additional phase transition to another phase that was up to recently not totally identified, not totally characterized, the so-called zeta phase. And so we wanted to study these systems, and we did it with traditional, let's say, ab initio calculations based on quantum espresso, on the quantum espresso code, due to the fact that this molecule is in the end relatively small. And so we can afford the calculation for these systems. But otherwise, it would be very difficult to explore a very wide, very broad landscape. How do you tackle this crystal structure prediction problem? You need to have a way to navigate the landscape, and you can do it by molecular dynamics or Monte Carlo, but you need to add extra ingredients like exploring different temperature regime from very high temperature, and then slowly cooling down the temperature to explore the thermodynamically accessible regions. Or you can actually try to speed up this by some advanced sampling like metadynamics, or there are other methods like basin hopping, minima hopping, that try to avoid what may happen is that molecular dynamics basically from once it has found a good minimum, it will oscillate forever, vibrating around the local minimum, but never explore further. So there are a number of methods that have been devised to speed up this exploration, and the one that we are using in this work was the genetic algorithm implemented in the USPEX calculation, in the USPEX code. So basically, what you do, you have a population of candidate structures, and then you rank them in terms of their energy or enthalpy, if you do things as a function of pressure. And then you need to generate new configuration. And this new configuration must be reasonable but diverse. And so there are various ways in which you can do this exploration. You can kind of combine takes two configuration and somehow cut them, extract structural motifs from the two parent configuration and put them together, and then optimize the new structure, and so find a new structure, optimized structure that may have some novelty. Or you can change, take the crystal structure positions and then vary the lattice constants that are and the geometry of the Bravais lattice involved, so that you basically bring the structure in a different basin, or you can kind of apply some sliding pressure and try to make the structure to overcome some energy barrier. Or if this system has many different species, you can also make some permutation of the chemical species, or permutation of the atoms corresponding to different chemical species. All these are moves that propose new new candidate structures, and then you relax, you reoptimize, you rank again, and generation after generation you explore the chemical space and the structural space. This is the general concept, the general strategy. This is implemented in USPEX, and was USPEX has been interfaced with Quantum Espresso, so USPEX can work with any code in principle, with any quantum engine, Quantum Espresso, VASP, and other as well. The important thing that we found in order to study glycine was to include van der Waals interaction in the energetics, because glycine is an organic molecule, and van der Waals interaction is important for organic molecules. And so actually the motivation was for this work was to understand if the van der Waals functionals that were coming out in the last 10-15 years were good enough to reproduce the known different polymorph for glycine, and maybe help in identifying what the zeta structure is. The way we did that was to generate a number of configuration, and then we have to kind of rank this configuration and explore these configurations. So to look at them in details, and to do that, we needed some clustering algorithm. And so what we found, for instance, is that by introducing, by generating this bunch of candidate structures and then trying to clusterize them, we were basically doing a simple clustering based on the nearest neighbor distance. So we were looking, not the nearest neighbor, the structural measure of structural difference, which is the cosine distance that is implemented in USPEX, and we were putting in the same cluster configurations that were proposed and were within a certain threshold. And if you make, if this threshold is very, very small, every configuration is basically a cluster on its own. And so you may have 1,000 different clusters. If this threshold distance instead is become larger and larger, eventually all the structure belong to the same cluster. And but what one can look for is how this number of clusters evolve as the clustering distance threshold is varied, and one can find regions for which a well-defined number of clusters remain more or less constant. And we found that around 0.08 for this cosine distance was basically a plateau in the structural landscape for glycine. And basically, in this way, one can find, let's say, a reasonable region in cui then looking for the for the different polymorph and find out what these 10, 11 clusters that you have at this value of the threshold correspond to. One interesting thing is that, as we will see, there is a very large, there is one structure which is somehow very different for all the others, because it remains a separate cluster up to very high distance d, and only merge with the rest at the very end when this distance threshold is made very large. And this actually is the alpha phase. So the gamma phase. The gamma phase, the one which is the most stable, actually, is actually the more diverse, the one that, in a certain sense, depart from the rest of the structure sooner. And so this, in a certain sense, is something that we didn't expect, but in a certain sense is a result that kind of explain why the gamma phase, in spite of being the most stable, is actually not so easy to obtain, because actually all the other structures that are metastable with respect to the gamma phase are actually nearer in terms of structural similarity. And so, in a certain sense, the gamma phase, which is the most stable in our calculation and in reality, is somehow isolated in the structural landscape. And by doing several USPES calculations with the different number of molecules in the unit cell, so 2, 3, 4 molecules in the unit cell, we found a number of structures, and we could recognize some of these clusters where the low-lying clusters are actually, most of them are easily identified with some of the well-known polymorphs. And there is, we find a low-lying structure, these purple dots, let's say, these purple circles that are present were present in all the simulation, the one with the 2 molecules per cell, the one with 3 molecules per cell, the one with 4 molecules per cell. And because actually this is a structure which is very simple, has only 1 molecule per cell, 1 non-equivalent molecule per cell, and so for this reason appears in all the simulation that we made, and is a structure that was not previously identified. And we proposed that this is indeed the structure that is obtained when you remove pressure from the epsilon phase. And there was a group of an experimental group that was having some unpublished data about this unknown structure. And by comparing our proposed structure and their experimental data of the ritual fit, structural fit, they obtain a very good agreement, and so this was therefore confirmed that the structure that we discovered with this USPEX calculation is indeed the zeta phase of glycine. Okay, this is what we could do. We did this without any, without need of using any machine learning, any neural network, and so we needed van der Waals because the energetics has to be accurately described, and van der Waals interaction is important for organic molecules, but we could do that because the molecule was relatively small. But there are other molecules, larger molecules, for instance, cholesterol. We worked on cholesterol with also Emine some years previously, and there were very interesting things associated to cholesterol. There are a number of phases that are in which cholesterol can crystallize, and only that the problem is that cholesterol is a much bigger molecule. It's like a 100 atom. Okay, many of them are hydrogens, but there are like I don't know, 20 or 30 carbon atoms in cholesterol molecules, and the structures that are present, that are known, are huge structures. Are structures that have 8 or 16 cholesterol molecules, and then with additional water molecules if there is if the crystal is hydrated. So this is a very big molecule, has very complicated phases, and so it would be very interesting to be able to explore its crystal structure landscape. But it's very, very difficult. You can imagine that doing a full exploration would be very, very complicated with the normal, let's say, DFT calculations. And however, this would be very useful because there are some, for instance, medical evidence. The gallbladder stones, of which these are some specimen, are made mostly of cholesterol crystals. But the disease, the structure that is observed is different depending on the disease they are due to. And since some of the structure and the evidence that you have in the experiment comes from NMR spectroscopy, and so it would be interesting to be able to let's say use NMR spectroscopy to extract the structural informations. But you need also to be able to propose different candidate structures, and this will require a thorough exploration of the phase space. And this is not easy at all. You can imagine that this is not easy with the full ab initio calculations. Another system that we have been recently studying with Yusuf Shaidu is the interaction of lithium with graphene or graphene-like materials. Lithium-ion battery, the commercial lithium-ion battery that we have everywhere, from our phones to our laptops, and in future in our maybe electrical cars. They are based on, nowadays they are based on lithium and graphite, but there is some limit in the amount of lithium that you can, and so therefore in the amount of energy that this battery can store. And let's say commercial graphite seems to have a limit of 1 lithium per 6 carbon, while there are some experimental evidence that graphene or materials derived from graphene can actually support a higher ratio of lithium to carbon, and so up to, in some cases, up to 1 lithium per every 2 carbons. So that would be a factor of 3 in the amount of the capacity, the amount of energy that the battery could store. And so it's interesting to study. It would be interesting to study the interaction of lithium and graphite. We did some work. Again, this actually is relevant for what Emine will talk later, because lithium and graphite, actually, there is a charge transfer, a relevant charge transfer between lithium and graphite. And so she will talk about how to deal with long-range interaction. Let's say to start with, we wanted to find ways we want to explore the possible structural properties of that carbon can take, because we know diamond, we know graphite, we know graphene, but actually this structure that is has been proposed, the substrate that has been proposed to as having this very high lithium concentration is not anything as like a simple material. It's something that is obtained by disrupting graphite, breaking it into fragments of graphene, and then applying, evaporating out the solvent, and then in the end you end up with something that is graphene-like, but is full of defects and full of so it's definitely not ideal crystal structure. So we need to explore complicated structure, and we need to do it accurately. So traditionally, when you have to do big calculation, you use model potentials, and there is a lot of efforts that has been put in constructing model potentials for semiconductors, for carbon, for ionic systems. So each class of material has, let's say, its type of potentials, of empirical potentials, and a lot of physical intuition has gone in developing of this model. The problem is that they are not transferable. Often they are not transferable into regions where you don't have experimental data. They are not transferable in region in which the stoichiometry may be a bit different, the coordination of the atom may be different from what you know from previous calculations or previous experiments. And in a certain sense, there have been a lot of physical intuition into the construction of these potentials, but the shape of the potential is kind of limited by the fantasy of the people and by the fact that you need to fix a reasonably small number of parameters on a reasonably small number of experimental data or theoretically calculated data. So this, however, has changed recently because there is a lot of computational power. We are doing, you saw already in the workshop, I think, in the school, high throughput calculation. So it's possible to generate and calculate accurately a number of configurations for a given stoichiometry. And so now it's becoming possible to replace the difficult to obtain experimental data with a number of DFT calculations, basically. And so to explore in a more systematic way the configuration space that therefore we can use this wealth of data to obtain more flexible potentials and more flexible and more flexible potentials that are trained, that are fitted on accurate data, and so therefore should be accurate and give an alternative to the the explicit calculation of very complex systems via DFT methods. And so this is what actually where machine learning enter. And the idea is that one need a lot of intuition to put to build a model potential, but these model potentials are too rigid. You need more flexibility, and so you need methods that are able to incorporate automatically this flexibility. And this, therefore, the idea is that you replace and then once you are able to do that, then you will be able to replace the expensive DFT calculation with interatomic potentials that have been trained to reproduce DFT data in a significant, in a sufficiently diverse set of environments, so that the potential is transferable. In general, one can think, if you think of the energy, the DFT energy, so there are terms in the DFT energy like the kinetic energy, the interaction with the external potential, maybe the exchange and correlation potential, that are relatively local. There are clearly long-range contributions like Hartree and maybe van der Waals if the system has important van der Waals contributions. So in principle, the energy is a complicated beast, but let's say that to start with, let's say that van der Waals is not important and that the system is overall neutral and so doesn't have a significant charge transfer. Carbon, for instance, if you are comparing very different configuration of carbon, this is is probably the case. I mean, carbons are locally neutral, so all the carbon atoms are neutral, and so there is no significant long-range interaction. So basically, you can end up writing the total energy as a sum of atomic-centered contributions. And so there are various ways in which this information can be kind of distilled and brought to define potentials. Canary regression, Gaussian processes, the gap potential developed by Gaborchani and co-worker is one way. The neural network presented by Baylor previously in the workshop is another way, and this is the way we follow. So basically, the PANNA code is in line with the neural network generated potential similar to the one that Professor Baylor presented earlier. And all these methods, whether it is the Gaussian processes or is a neural network potential, it's based on this decomposition, or at least in their original formulation. They are based in this atomic total energy decomposition in atomic contributions, and is based on the description of what this local environment is. And so we used the modified Baylor-Parinello descriptor, in which basically you, to each atom, you attach, you build a sphere around each atom, and then you count how many atoms are at given distance, and then you count how many pairs of atoms are at different distances and in different angles. And so from that, you basically build a number of a population, you build an histogram basically of a kind of discretized pair correlation function for the radial pair correlation function, and more complicated angular correlation function, and on the basis of these local geometry descriptors, you use this local geometry descriptor as input for your neural network. Okay, so there is this so-called G vector. So these descriptors are contains basically radial things that sample the radial distribution function, things that sample the radial and angular distribution functions. I will not enter in details, but for instance, what you have, if you have a glycine molecule, for instance, and we can focus on the nitrogen atom and look how many hydrogen are around, and there are a certain number of hydrogens at a certain distance, and then a second shell of hydrogen, which is the hydrogen attached to the carbon, the nearest neighbor, the carbon which is nearest neighbor to the nitrogen, and then there are additional in the structure. If it is a solid, there are other molecules, and there will be a broader distribution for other hydrogens, and for each pairs of species, nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, pairs, you can build kind of these histograms. And this is a description of the structure as seen from the nitrogen, for instance. This is actually a radial description only, so you can then think of something that also involves the angle, so in which you look at pairs or triplets of atoms, the central atom and two other atoms in the neighborhood, and the angle in between, and from that you extract additional numbers that will characterize the local environment. If you do that, then each of these set of local descriptors enter in a element-specific neural network, produce an element-specific energy contribution, and if you sum up all the energy contribution for all the atoms in your crystal, in your molecule, or in your system, then you end up with an estimate of the total energy. You fit, you train your neural network on these data, and then you get a potential that hopefully is accurate and reproduce the DFT data. And PANNA, this is done in our by the people working with me, has been done using the PANNA code, and basically this is the workflow. Maybe you have already seen this picture or something similar to it, but basically you generate the data, you generate the descriptors, you pack this descriptor in a way which is easy to deal with. Then part of these data are used for training and optimize the network parameters. Part of this data are used regularly to check the quality of to get an unbiased estimate of the quality of the training that you get so far. And so after you have completed this training procedure, you dump the network parameters in a file, which using a plugin that is coupled to, for instance, LAMPS, you can therefore use this potential in your simulations. All this is described in the PANNA, in the PANNA paper, which is published now. But okay, I forgot. This is the archive, place where you can find it. Okay. So with this methodology, we looked at carbon structures because we wanted to look at very generic carbon carbon potential. We wanted to be able to describe a very complicated structure. We wanted not to be biased toward some particular configuration. And therefore, we devised, we are not the only one, but let's say there is a procedure in which you can build more and more accurate or more and more robust potential. You start from somewhere. Suppose that you have some force field, a reasonable one or unreasonable one. You generate the data by molecular dynamics or by any other methods. You may have a number of configurations that are you start from. Using this configuration, you calculate the energy of this configuration by DFT, and then you have a bunch of configuration. If these configuration are many, then you need to actually do some clustering similar to the one that we did for glycine in order to figure out what are the representative configurations for your space. And then once you have found this representative, you run some molecular dynamics because you want to explore the phase space around the minima. And then from this run of molecular dynamics, you can extract a subset of uncorrelated samples so that you are sampling the thermodynamic phase space, but without too much correlation between one configuration and the next. And on these new configurations, on this set of configurations, you calculate an accurate energy. You do it by DFT. This is the expensive part. So all the initial part is not really expensive because it's all done with a model potential, with some model potential, with some molecular dynamics, but it's not very expensive. The expensive calculations are when you pick a set of configurations and you calculate the DFT. Then you train on this data and you generate, therefore, after the training, you have a new neural network potential. And with this neural network potential, you repeat the cycle. You go through specs, you generate new configuration. If they are new, really new configuration, you include them in your database. And you go on until basically there are no new structures. So basically you have exhausted the phase space. And then once this happens, then you dump your final neural network potential, and this is what you do. And this is what we made, what we did. And so for carbon, and so we started with some reactive force field, and we found a number of different structures. We did this calculation. We did the DFT calculation associated to that. We trained, and basically we repeated this for a number of cycles. And what you can see is that this is the energy, the error per atom. So the three top panel are error millielectron volt per atoms and the error in the energy. And then the bottom three panels are electron volt per angstrom. There is the error on the forces. And what you see is that after some number of iterations, the training error goes down, the validation errors goes down, and you basically obtain a converged potential. And if you repeat this for a certain number of cycles, eventually the number of configurations, sorry, the error that you obtain stabilize. what you can see is that at the first iteration, the error, for instance, let's look at the error, energy per atom error. The first iteration gives you an error of something like 10 millieV per atom. The second iterations, you have expanded the data set because you generated more configurations, and now the error per atom is like 20. And then if you do the third iteration, you further expand the data set, and the error now is 25. So one could say, okay, I do in more and more calculation, and actually my error is becoming worse. No, yes and no. I mean, it's becoming worse, but it's becoming worse because you are asking more to your neural network. So, for instance, if we compare, so it's not a fair comparison to compare the error, the validation error of the first, second, and third iteration, because they are computed on different data set, and the data set used in the third iteration is much larger, much more diverse, much more challenging than the one used in the first iteration. And so, in fact, if you use the data set, the validation data set that you are using in the third that has been generated, and then you are using for the third iteration, you see that the validation, I mean the error that you would have obtained using the potential at the end of the first iteration, or even the potential at the end of the second iteration, would have a much higher error, because they were trained on and validated on a more restricted data set. Okay, I skip. I come to this table, which I mean is in a numerical form. It tells you the concept that I was trying to make. It tells you the message that I would like to give you, the take-home message. Okay, top table is energy per atom, error in the energy. Bottom table is energy for the forces, but the message is the same. If we train on all the data set, in the full data set, at the end we have an error, a training error, which is of the order of like 22 millieV per atom. And if we validate on the same, on a set of independent configuration, but taken from the same distribution, we get a similar error. If you instead focus on a more restricted data set, like all the configurations that are at a small distance, like 0.05 from a reference structure, like diamond. So if you look at all configurations, you always look at configurations that are very similar to diamond, you can get a training error, which is very small. 2.6 millieV per atom is a very small number. And if you look in the validation data set of the same type that are similarly very close to diamond, the validation error that you obtain is also very, very small. So in this sense, you would say, okay, I can have a very good error if I concentrate on diamond. Yes, but only if you are all interested in structures that are very close to diamond. Because if you look then at the validation error when you look at structures that are farther and farther from diamond, then you obtain errors that are completely disaster. Instead, if you train on a very diverse data set, like the full one that we mentioned before, it has a larger error, 22, but this error is very much the same, or even maybe even better become for certain specific phases, but it's kind of a robust error. I mean, you are not going to have surprises if you explore configurations that are not that you did not include in the original in your training. Okay, so it's very important. So there is a correlation between the diversity of the structure that you are including in the training and in the robustness of the error that you can obtain. We did a number of calculations and we saw that our potential was very accurate, comparable with the gap potentials for carbon structures, for a number of carbon structures that were proposed in the literature. We get very good equation of states. We get very good phonon calculations for graphite, diamond, and graphene. And then there was more study about the bilayer graphene, carbon nanotubes. So that comparison with respect to DFT and neural network results are all very favorable. And amorphous carbon is also very well reproduced. Calculation, I mean, compare very well with the experiment and with previous calculation by the gap potential. Okay. Before, okay, I'm maybe late. Let me just quickly go in another system that I've been studying recently, which is the problem of computing, I mean, modeling the solid phase epitaxy of silicon. The problem now in the semiconductor industry is to I mean, we reached the limit of the dimension of the transistors, and so the only way to improve the density of transistors in the chip is to go three-dimensional. And to go three-dimensional, you have to actually then regrow silicon on top of the first layer, etc. And when you do that, the silicon that you deposit is amorphous, and then you have to recrystallize it. So the problem of solid phase epitaxy is to actually describe properly this recrystallization effect. And so basically what you want to model is to study the recrystallization of from a crystalline structure to how an amorphous overlayer recrystallize and at which speed this happens. And we generate a potential that is designed for this for silicon and amorphous silicon and surfaces, etc. So similarly, we use the same Baylor-Parinello radial symmetry functions, the modified angular symmetry functions. We generate a number of configuration and we train, and at the end we generate a potential. And similarly, we generate configurations trying to I mean, we generate a number of configurations. Our training set has been updated. So we start with some configurations. You calculate them, you train a potential, and then you validate this potential on a number of simple properties. And you iterate the way we said before, until these simple properties are satisfied. Then for once you found a very good potential, a potential that satisfied these simple properties, you generate more configurations for the liquid, for the amorphous, for surfaces, and you check more complex properties like melting temperature and the like, and from that you extract some additional potential, and then you do the let's say further optimization. So the cycle is a bit more complicated, but in the end, the idea is that you have to explore sufficiently the phase space because you want to have a potential which is uniform, possibly, hopefully uniformly accurate everywhere. And so the data set on which we trained is quite diverse, contains amorphous, bulk, liquid, surfaces, etc., etc. And okay, and for instance, we have reproduced very well the phonons in the bulk. We reproduce very well the amorphous GOR, the radial distribution function. We reproduce well the surface energies of the, relative stability of surface energies, and we have a decent description of the melting temperature in the end, with the neural network giving like 1468 Kelvin, compared with an experimental value of 1685. You may think this is not a very good agreement, but you will discover if you do this. Okay, this is perfectly in line with the DFT result that we are trying to reproduce. I mean, we fit the neural network on PBE data, and we get 1468. There are in the literature DFT results for the melting temperature, PBE melting temperature, and it is 1540, which is within error bars. They are the same, so they are compatible to each other. So our neural network really seems to model well the PBE potential. An alternative functionals that has been proposed and actually advertised as to be more accurate for solids is PBE Sol. And we found, actually, we originally started with PBE Sol because we thought it was better, but instead it is much worse. It's only like 1200 Kelvin is the melting temperature, and this is indeed what GAP potentials also obtain. Yeah, the experimental result is higher, but at least PBE is a decent melting temperature, and we could model this recrystallization, and we see the formation of some growth motif, some pyramid that is oriented in the 111 directions. The faces are oriented in the 111 direction. These are models that experimental were proposed, but were not, let's say, confirmed. And okay. We are still working on that, but it's an interesting feature. All the process is associated to some activation energy, and so we can extract from the simulation the activation energy, which is compatible with our simulations. The experiment gives a certain velocity of the recrystallization that's follow an Arrhenius plot, let's say, as a function of temperature, inverse temperature, and models are everywhere, basically, and our data are here. So we get the right the slope. We are estimating this, the magnitude of the recrystallization speed, and our estimated, I would say, estimated excitation energy is 3.15, and the experiment is 273 electron volt. So they are compatible, so they are reasonably in good agreement. Basically, after all the simulation, what we think is the problem that we are having. The reason why our recrystallization is so fast is similar to what other people have done before. Our amorphous systems are not annealed enough. I mean, our amorphous, so we think that in order to improve the agreement, we don't need to improve the potential, but we need to improve the sample. We need to have amorphous systems that are with less defective amorphous systems. So we are actually working on improve the amorphous quality, and then we will try to isolate what is the main mechanism for this solid phase epitaxy. And if we succeed in having a velocity speed of recrystallization which is small enough to be compatible with the experiment, we will need to go beyond molecular dynamics, because molecular dynamics would not be able to simulate such a long time. So we will need to go to kinetic Monte Carlo. But as far as neural networks are concerned, and I will finish with that, I will say that this looks like a promising way to model physical phenomena at atomistic level. We obtain, in the particular case of this solid phase epitaxy, we obtain the correct order of magnitude for the barrier energies, and but it's important to have a good underlying DFT description. So at the end of the day, we will go back and we will need to check if the DFT that we are using is good enough for the system that we for the property that we want to use. So neural network or machine learning in general is not a magic tool that will give good result even if the data that you are fitting on are not accurate enough. So in this case, for the melting temperature of silicon, PB Sol is not a good exchange correlation functional, and PB is more reasonable. Maybe some other functional is more realistic. So I think beside trying to speed up calculation using machine learning, still we need to develop better functionals to get a broader description of materials. And so I stop here. I remind the people that did all the work, Emine, Ruggero, Franco, and Yusuf, and I thank you for your attention. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stefano.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry I've been late, probably. Yes.
Questions? Do you have questions?
Yeah. Do you have questions? I can't hear anything.
Online, does anybody have a question?
I don't see anything.
Okay, any question? Okay. So Stefano, we don't have a question.
Okay. I hope it was not too boring. And
I think part of it is that we listen to Yusuf also.
sure.
Okay.
Okay. So
So if there are no questions, so let's thank Stefano.
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So please, Stefano, you make your slides available to us. Is that okay?
Sorry?
Could you make your slides available to us?
Sure, sure. I will produce the yes, I will send you the PDF of the slides. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much.